Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Loyalty Leaders video podcast. And I'm Phil Rubin. I'm founder of Gray Space Matters. And I am here in the studio with Joe Ciccolo. Joe is the founder of two companies. One is BitAML, and the other is Comply Fit. And Joe is an advocate and an expert in all things crypto. Hence the Bitcoin, hence the analog Bitcoin print behind him. He's based in California. He's very involved in a lot of things related to this in California from a policy standpoint. He's an advocate for his firm. Let me back up. His firm focuses on compliance for FIs, for financial institutions, with respect to cryptocurrencies. And just talking a little bit before we got started, the importance of that, and maybe we talk about this a little bit just to get things started, and then we'll talk about the main topic for today. The main topic for today, before we get too much further off track, is there's been a lot of interesting discussions about Starbucks' announcement that they are exiting their foray into the metaverse with their Odyssey program. And so Joe and I are going to have a conversation about that. But just before that, Joe, why don't we talked a little bit about this. There are all these different terms that, and most people are not fully informed about what all these different terms mean, from crypto to Bitcoin to NFTs to blockchain. And I think the important thing here, more than anything, is this is all new. People aren't fully educated about it. There are risks because, like anything new, there are bad actors out there. Sam Bankman-Fried comes to mind. Because he apparently allegedly stole tens of millions of dollars. I guess he's convicted and in jail, so maybe it's not
waiting sentence.
But that aside, there's a lot of interesting applications and use cases in this world, and obviously there's money to be made because less than 6 months ago, Bitcoin was in the 20s of thousands of dollars, and it's, I don't know what it is today, 60 something. That's even better than the stock market has been doing, and the stock market's been doing pretty well. Anyway, Joe, it's great to meet you, and excited for this conversation.
Yeah, same here, Phil. Thanks for having me.
You bet. So let's focus on Starbucks for a little bit, because I think that's why people are tuning in.
Sure.
A few years ago, Starbucks went out and said we're gonna create this thing called Odyssey. They launched it. It was separate from Starbucks Rewards. They announced that they were exiting it and shutting it down, I don't know, in the last couple of weeks. And there's been all this conversation. And it's interesting to sort of see what the different takes are. There's a lot of people are highly skeptical of anything related to blockchain, crypto, Bitcoin, NFT. It's probably why the price of Bitcoin has doubled, climbing the proverbial wall of worry. But why don't you, you're in the middle of all that much more than I am, and I can talk a little bit about where my involvement is. But what's your reaction to some of the remarks people have made? Kind of crapping on this whole thing and saying, yeah, of course, no surprise here, but there's a lot more to it than that, especially where we are in the life cycle.
Sure. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think first of all, Starbucks was ahead of their time, and that cuts both ways, right? It's good for innovation. It's good to make mistakes, and as you pointed out, they didn't in any way, to my knowledge, hinder their existing rewards program, which is very well received. I'm a member myself. I enjoy a nice cup of Starbucks coffee from time to time, but they were able to tinker in a new marketplace or in a new area of the market that's less. Where there's less awareness and less adoption. And you mentioned it yourself, I think that's the key issue with NFTs and crypto and blockchain more broadly, or big tent. there's just a lot of folks that don't understand. And when folks don't understand something, especially when it has to do with money, they stay away. And I think for good reason, right? If you're not aware of where your funds are going and how things are being tracked and you're not comfortable as a consumer, I think it's a wise and prudent step not to participate in something. As much as I would love the crypto space to have full adoption, we want folks to be participating in a meaningful way, and we want consumers to feel comfortable. And I advocate for that every day doing compliance consulting, as you mentioned. Let's balance innovation with consumer protection, and let's make consumers comfortable. And I think, like I said, Starbucks, they're ahead of their time, ahead of the curve. I would have liked to have seen them maybe stay in a little bit longer, do some more tinkering, take things back to the workshop, so to speak, and kind of work through, some of the impediments to adoption, and maybe make things a little bit clearer to the new consumer. But ultimately, as I understand, they decided to sunset that program, at least for now. But real quick on the NFT side, I think, when they started with their platform with Odyssey, it was a time where there was a lot of euphoria and a lot of excitement around NFTs, and that marketplace saw a precipitous decline, along with the decline of the price of crypto, like Bitcoin and Ethereum, in the last sort of bear market. And so when that enthusiasm dried up, it really made folks skeptical, because a lot of people lost money if they bought at a higher point in the market and potentially exited. They lost some money, and I think it was easy to sort of poo-poo anything related to crypto, blockchain, and by extension NFTs. And so when you're appealing to a very narrow cast audience of folks that are extremely enthusiastic about anything crypto, blockchain, and NFT related, I think ultimately that's probably, if I had to guess, where Starbucks' audience was for this platform, not the sort of lunch bucket or run-of-the-mill, if you will, consumer. They, again, probably stayed away and then sort of watched as the market kind of went down. They said, well, probably a prudent decision for me to have not participated. And then, unfortunately, in that bear market cycle, we see the outcome of that program in its original promise.
I've studied financial markets since I was studying finance back in undergrad in the bull market 1980s. Not to date myself, but it's that what we saw in the NFT market isn't unique to NFTs or anything crypto or blockchain related. It's stocks in the 1980s and again in the late 1990s, and arguably, in the last few years. That's just, things tend to get overdone to the upside, and then they tend to get overdone to the downside. But it kind of misses the point of the value of what the blockchain can do, right? Not just for currencies and transactions, but what the blockchain can do in terms of commerce as a whole. Which I think a whole nother facet, and maybe if we have time, we can get into that. I have a slightly different. I don't disagree with what you said about Starbucks. I do think that, number one, Starbucks is clearly a global leader in loyalty, right?
Absolutely.
They're one of the brands in the world that gets customers to pay them up front, and they have for a long time, for an addicted, a caffeine addicted beverage habit. Not that everybody doesn't, there are plenty of people that drink decaf. But it's a habit, and they've done a great job in exploiting that I think in a positive way. And I think they tend to try and do things that are good for society as much as it's good for shareholders. My take on Starbucks is, as a leader, and we talked a little bit about, and you talked about, how do you balance regulation but not stifle innovation? Leaders who lead, and I would say from a loyalty standpoint, at best it's 90-10, 10% of the people focusing on loyalty, quote unquote, initiatives are leaders, and the other 90% are either fast followers or laggards. I think Starbucks, as a leader, saw an opportunity to do something new, different, and innovative. They were smart to do it separate from Starbucks Rewards, and they took a risk. And part of being a leader is taking risks and tying this back to the foundation of fundamentals of finance. there's no such thing as risk without reward. So you've got to take risks like that. Just like Apple took a risk with an iPod and then an iPhone. So I
Yeah, no,
think,
I don't disagree.
and it seems like there's a lot more to it than that. So much of the naysayers relative to, crypto, blockchain, NFTs, some of that's a result of, certainly within marketing, there's, just like people overdo euphoria in investments in marketing, marketers tend to get euphoric over bright shiny objects, and I think a lot of them a few years ago saw NFTs and said, oh my god, this is the future, and probably put the cart before the horse, in the sense of a lot of these NFTs were really just sort of glorified serialized JPEGs, and there wasn't enough value and utility or metadata embedded in them to unlock the value of what a blockchain application can do. Do you think that's a fair assessment? And what's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of hype, and still is, around NFTs, and sort of requires going a layer or two deeper and researching. Okay, does this really make sense? Can I get something a magnitude better than I can with my existing rewards program if I'm a company? And two, with the beginning of NFTs as a concept or as a subsector within crypto and blockchain, its launch was very auspicious in that it was sort of pictures of apes smoking cigars, right? And that was our indelible first image or first impression of NFTs. And so you can see why that might not translate well to the rewards space. Although I definitely think that there's much more of an opportunity in rewards in that aspect, or that industry rather, as opposed to someone's consideration of what a piece of art might be. I will add, and I think it's pretty interesting and I can't speak specifically, obviously, to Starbucks and what they went through, but there have been a lot of questions about secondary market for these different types of NFTs. And we saw a lot of speculation around that. I mentioned a moment ago about the sort of alluding to the bored apes, right? So a picture of an ape smoking a cigar, that's someone's idea of art. Folks were buying and selling these on secondary platforms, and searching for marketplace value. And so that brings up a lot of potential questions from a legal and compliance and risk management perspective, that if a rewards platform is using these different NFTs and somehow they get onto a separate platform or even on that company's platform, and folks are buying, trading, speculating, or doing some sort of exchange with that, they may find themselves under some sort of regulatory scrutiny for that, as opposed to something a little bit more simple, where it's essentially a to a degree store credit, right? You mentioned Starbucks, you sort of load money ahead of time, and now you have that, and it sort of deducts from your balance each time you go through the drive-through,
Yeah.
as I do so often. So I think there are some separate questions with NFTs, and that may have, to some degree, influenced Starbucks and other platforms to say, maybe we don't quite have all the regulatory considerations buttoned up, and maybe that contributed. I'm speculating here. Maybe that contributed to their pause.
Yeah, I also think what's lost in this, and this goes back to education and people not fully understanding this, is the simple notion of tokenization and what tokenization can represent
Mm-hmm.
in a day or in an age where so much of our assets are either digitally managed, digitally accessible. Think about your assets in a fidelity.com or Schwab, where you can, trade stocks on your phone and do all these things. But when things are tokenized and they're secured on chain, they're more protected, but they're also more verifiably transactionable,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's part of the premise of, I mean, the company that I'm invested in, called Kibi. They're a B2B marketplace for digital assets, including rewards. And the benefit, and this is what sold me on investing in that, is the transactional benefits are its efficiency, and it's the ability that contracts are smart,
Mm-hmm.
that there's real time reconciliation, and it minimizes the burden on lawyers and accountants to for the contracting and the accounting of these transactions. And that's the benefit of cryptocurrencies as well, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think you mentioned a lot of key terms there, smart contracts and other aspects. And it makes me wonder, I guess I'll take a little bit of a detour here. To my thinking, a lot of what we talk about in the bigger picture, sort of crypto and blockchain space, is that we look forward to a day when people aren't talking necessarily about words like Bitcoin or blockchain, but rather don't really know what's going on underneath the hood and don't need to,
Right.
right? No more than I need to know how email works. I just sort of know that I type in a bunch of characters and I press send, and absent a unique event, I have supreme confidence that that message is going to go through to you, Phil, when I
Yeah.
send you an email. So I don't necessarily know what goes on under the hood. Same with electricity and other things we might take for granted in our daily lives. Those sorts of pieces of infrastructure just sort of show up and work. And so I think maybe that could have been part of the one other aspect of this with Starbucks is what if they had not necessarily gone out of their way to outwardly discuss NFTs and other concepts that may be alienating to folks that, not that they're anti NFT or anti crypto, but rather sort of look at that and say, I don't really know enough to be comfortable here. And then just sort of walk away or say, hey, I love my existing rewards platform. As you mentioned, Starbucks does a bang up job with that. So why would I change? And so, in some ways, I think they were also a little bit of a victim of their own success in that they just have an excellent rewards platform that folks sort of look at that and say, well, I have 95 or 100% of what I want and what I need in a rewards platform that I don't necessarily need to stray to something else. And ultimately, it seemed like they were playing to a very narrow cast sort of
Yeah.
crypto enthusiast audience. And at the end of the day, that didn't translate to real, quote unquote, real numbers for as big of a global brand as they are.
Yet, what I forget who said it, but you learn more from you learn more from your failures than you do from your successes, right? Because sometimes we just get lucky and we're successful, but when you
Right.
fail, if you take the time to figure out why you failed, there's an incredible amount of learning that you get. And I would suggest that for Starbucks, for everybody crapping on Starbucks for doing Odyssey in the first place, I would say they learned a ton, and they know a lot
Absolutely.
more than probably anybody else in the quick service restaurant space about whatever you want to call it, Web3 and some of these emerging technologies. And their second one will be way better than most people's first ones in terms of
Absolutely,
initial.
they're winning. They're winning the war. They lost one small battle. As you said, they've probably learned infinitely more lessons than the company that has done nothing and is laughing at them from the sidelines. And one, that's not right. But two, they're missing the bigger point in that the lessons learned from this. And I suspect that Starbucks is going to use that to their benefit and maybe find some way to start to incrementally do some A/B testing or experimentation through their existing rewards by some enhancement features that folks can either opt into or somehow participate in maybe a controlled environment, but and still
Yeah,
enjoy all the benefits and all of the privileges that come with being a rewards member.
it's why uh, the FDA requires drugs be tested on rats before people, right? Um,
I suppose if you want to call the members of the crypto community rats, I don't.
no, I'm thinking more like I live in Washington D.C. We have like New York, we have a rat problem. But
Yeah.
no, because you don't want to take it's sort of the Hippocratic oath, right? Like,
Mhm. Absolutely.
don't if you're Starbucks, the Hippocratic oath is don't screw up Starbucks rewards. Go test these things somewhere that's boxed off because you don't want to do any harm to the mothership, and that business is tough enough. Um, which is also in kind of in violation of loyalty best practice, which is the more things are integrated and tied together, the more effective they're going to be, the more support they're going to get from an enterprise standpoint, et cetera, et cetera. But this is a classic example of testing new things. You know, it's why Skunkworks started, right? Like, don't mess up the rest of keep
Mhm.
this thing separate and see what works, if it works, and see what we learn.
Absolutely.
I am intrigued though, and I've had a number of conversations with some companies that are doing some really interesting things in tokenizing, let's call them rewards, um, and what the value of tokenization is for things like rewards. So maybe speak a little, share your thoughts on, the same way something of financial value can be tokenized through a cryptocurrency. Rewards that are then tokenized potentially, number one, have more value because there's data ascribed to them, but also because of the transferability. And that might be in a place, for example, where secondary markets of those rewards or the ability to gift them or buy, sell, trade them unlocks more value because of the liquidity. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, no, sure does. I think there's a lot of value in tokenization, and so with an NFT, it's non-fungible token, right? It's assigned, or specific token is assigned to a specific coin, or in this case, a specific reward or activity. So I think there's a lot of data that can be used behind that, and powerfully used by industry to know and understand the experiences of their users, and to redefine that experience and provide even better experience for those that are engaged in their loyalty or rewards program. So I definitely see the upside to that. On sort of the government side, working with some policymakers, they're experimenting with ways to tokenize vital records or tokenize real estate transactions and provide a sort of quote unquote public alternative to something that is done through private companies like title insurance companies. So I think there's a tremendous opportunity and a tremendous upside to that.
For the record, that emergency vehicle activity was not in Washington D.C. That was in California, right?
Yes, correct. Apologies for the background noise.
No, no, no. I don't know if you could hear my dog a few minutes ago, but that's okay.
Sure.
That's what makes some of these recordings interesting. Um, yeah, the record tokenizing records, especially medical records, and providing security for them, and looking at it as a way to literally encrypt the sensitive, HIPAA governed information seems like an enormous opportunity.
Wow.
Yeah, it certainly is. I think if we think about any time we've opened a bank account or opened some sort of record and we had to share the number on our driver's license or social security number or some other attribute, even if it's a name, email address, or address, which are usually public information, we're putting that in a bunch of different honeypots, and that are
Yeah.
susceptible to hacking. And we're seemingly sharing the same thing over and over again, just with a different audience.
Right.
So I think having some sort of tokenization or record using
Right.
blockchain could be vital to solving these sort of problems associated with having any number of different entities with your information, and not a day goes by that we don't hear about a high
Oh,
profile hack or some sort of cyber threat to industry. And I suspect it's happened to some members of your audience before, either individually or with their respect to their employers. And it's an unfortunate fact of life. The bad guys just need one mistake, one hiccup, one little
Yeah.
and that allow them to have access to sensitive data and information. So if we could tokenize it, if we could make it safe, I think the opportunities are there, and we're only getting started with this journey in the wider Web3 space.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. I mean, if going back to your illustration, your reference of electricity, like we don't know how most people don't know how electricity works. They just know that they plug something in and electricity comes out and it charges their device or powers their computer or whatever. And I think that's absolutely, you're spot on. That was part of the problem with something like Odyssey that's promoted as Web3, as NFTs, as a blockchain type of application. At the end of the day, nobody cares whether their loyalty program is running on this API or this web service or this server or this mainframe. Like back in the day, it was more, does it work? Is it easy to, and can I trust it?
Absolutely, I
And
think
I think
those are the most critical questions. It's not necessarily what is behind the technology. You'll have your tech enthusiasts, of course, that will want to know, just as you'll have an electrician be able to explain to you how electricity works. I would add to that analogy, if it's not worn out already, with regard to electricity. When electricity first came out, there were all these propaganda pieces running in newspapers saying, why would you rip up your walls and put this fire hazard in? It's just a death trap. And it was really just scaring people, hoping that they would go back to the comfort and safety of a kerosene lantern as opposed to electricity. And that's actually an analogy we use all the time in the crypto space, that
Yeah.
folks are just sort of scared of something they don't know about, and unfortunately are susceptible to some of the negative critiques of crypto. And look, it's not a perfect space. Web3 is not a perfect space. There are sensible criticisms and policy discussions to be had. Absolutely, no question about it. Unfortunately, the negative headlines are what steal the day. Excuse me. When you have stories about people losing a crypto wallet address or being locked out of their account, or you mentioned FTX earlier on in the program. An exchange just leaves in the middle of the night with everybody's funds, or collapses, or there's some sort of high-profile fraud case. Those headlines, unfortunately, are what lead in crypto and blockchain, as opposed to, hey, we've identified a great way to harness the power of Web3 to deliver a better loyalty experience to you, or we've identified a way to transmit currency anywhere in the world near instantaneously at next to no expense, without having to go through different intermediaries and without having to trust one's government, which, in the case of some countries, you don't have to explain the why of Bitcoin, right? So I don't have to explain the why of Bitcoin to Venezuelans, or Argentinians or Cypriots, right? They've been through
Yes.
enough currency crisis to understand why the utility is there. And I think we're blessed here in the first world to maybe not have to know or not have to necessarily appreciate the why, because we have not been, knock on wood, through some sort of calamity of crisis with regard to currency. And so getting back to your point on NFTs and Web3, let's do less to explain and sort of curtail the marketing and avoid the temptation to talk about how forward-looking we are, and maybe save that energy for working underneath the hood, and ultimately, to your point, deliver an amazing rewards experience that the end user goes, wow, this is seamless. I have what I need. I trust the folks behind this, and I'm engaged with, and I'm going to be loyal to this platform. And at the end of the day, that's what consumers are looking for. And then maybe save the energy for the doing, as opposed to the storytelling.
Yeah, no, I think that's very well said, Joe. And I think, if anything, that's what people need to take away from this, especially the marketing leaders that are hopefully tuning into this. It's, you got to think about, paraphrase James Carville for this. It's the customer, stupid. Like, think about the customer and think about what the customer wants. And then it becomes much easier, not only to solve the problem, but to sell it in.
Absolutely. And there'll be plenty of time to tell the story later on, once something is out there in circulation, has reached critical mass, and then come on to programs such as yours and others and talk about what it meant to build and how we got there. And at that point, my hunch is it would be very surprising to the actual users to think, oh my gosh, there are NFTs and there's Web3 or something like that, and these types of buzzwords, if you will, behind the scenes, actually doing what I'm ultimately experiencing as the consumer.
Yeah. And I'll also add, there's some folks doing some things, tokenizing rewards today, that people will start experiencing more and more. And those who don't believe the hype will eventually believe the hype.
Agreed.
With all due respect to Public Enemy. Joe, it's really great to talk with you today. This has been a really fun conversation. And thanks for joining me. And hopefully we'll do it again when Starbucks starts embedding some of these new technologies into Starbucks rewards, which they might even be doing today, right?
Likewise. Thanks for having me, Phil. And next time we meet up, we'll have to get a Starbucks coffee and and reminisce about this conversation and what's ahead.
Sounds good. All right. Thanks again. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Have a great day.
Thank you.